Good afternoon. I have to start with a small apology. One, I am Finnish, but I don't speak Finnish. My parents are from Finland, from Tampere, but I was brought up in Sweden. The second apology is that I'm a reporter, so I usually write and I very seldomly use PowerPoint. So if the things you see on the slides do not resemble what I say, just forgive me and listen to my words. They're more important. I'm going to talk to you today about the rise and fall of a company called Cambridge Analytica and how I partly feel a little bit responsible for that. Can I just quickly hear, who of you have never heard about the Cambridge Analytica case? Can you quickly raise your hand? That's one person. Okay. The other ones are familiar with it, so I will retell the story, but I will tell the story from a meta perspective so you can get the insight of how we reporters see it, how I see it today, and where I think it will take us. This story I wrote back in 2016 with my brilliant reporter colleague Hannes Grasseger turned out to be one of the most widely read and quoted article, not only in the German-speaking market, but also in the English market. The original story was published in Switzerland. It had the title, I did not invent the bomb, I only showed that it exists. That is a quote by Mikael, a Polish researcher. I will get to him. And he basically referred to the bomb as the fact that you can create psychological profiles based on Facebook accounts. And that has such a huge impact, he said, that it's equal to the nuclear bomb. The article was then republished or translated into the English market. That was for Vice Motherboard. And it was more focused then on the impact it had on the Trump election. Now, let me tell you how all of this started. If you are an investigative reporter, a lot of crazy people come up to you and tell you weird stories. And I'm sure Jessica Aro today in the morning can relate to that. I don't know if she's still around, but a lot of people come to you and want to tell you what they have learned about the world and why this would be a good story. And one of these people came up to my colleague early in 2016, and he told him about a company named SCL, Strategic Communication Laboratories, and that they have gotten their hands on a big set of psychological profiles from the Cambridge University, and that they are using that for voter manipulation. Now, that sounds partly like a good story for a movie, and partly it sounds like a crazy story. But my colleague decided to go for it and look closer into it. And when he started researching it, we soon realized the story is about 3 key words. One is micro-targeting. Micro-targeting basically means that you don't speak to a group, you try to speak to individuals. And this is the ages-old dream of all marketers and advertising people. And so far, it has been very difficult to do so. You usually have a group, but if you could speak to an individual and really know that person, it would be much easier to sell him or her something based upon the fact that you know what he or she likes or dislikes. So the problem with micro-targeting is that until recently, we didn't have enough information about people. Then came big data. You all know what that is. People were openly and happily engaged in giving out their most private data on social media sites. There's been studies who show that people give away more private information to Facebook than they would give to their best friends. So here we suddenly have a tool that collects great amounts of super personal data that gives you a feeling of who is the individual and not who is the collective. Which leads us to the third word, psychographics. Psychographics is a method to translate big data into profiles, meaning we don't only know who is the individual person, but we actually know what is the character of that person. Let me see if we can find that chart. And this is a basic idea that we don't only know the demographics. So demographics is how old you are, where you're from, how much money you make, what's your gender. That gives a rough idea who that person is. By psychographics, you tell what's your hobby, what do you really like, but also what are you afraid of. And if you know these things, you get to know the person on a more intimate level. And this intimate level can now be matched with a psychological model. And there are different models for measuring your personality. The most famous and most reliable one is the so-called Ocean model or the Big Five model. Ocean is for the 5 starting words. These are the 5 personality traits that can describe any person in the whole world. One is openness. So, do you enjoy new experiences? The second is conscientiousness. So, are you an orderly person? Do you prefer to plan out your life? 3 is the famous extraversion. So, do you engage with people? But also, more importantly, do you get energy out of talking to people? It's said that Finland is the most introverted country in the world. I don't know if that's true. 4 is agreeableness. So do they put people's needs before others? Meaning, are you helpful? And the 4th is neuroticism. Do you tend to worry a lot? And that is the most important trait, because here you have fear, anger, and depression. Now, if you combine the data you have from Facebook, telling people who you are, what you like, with the Ocean personality model, then you get a quite clear picture of who are you talking to. Here again, you see a more detailed thing, what a Big Five profile would look like. A conscientious person is typically hardworking and punctual and well-organized. Low conscientiousness would be lazy or late. High neuroticism would be worried, temperamental, self-conscious, emotional. If you have low neuroticism, you're cool, even-tempered, unemotional. Now, the guy who brought these 2 things together is a Polish researcher named Mikael. He worked for Cambridge University, and he started looking into this, the collection of a psychological profile and the Big Five. And the big question he had, and all psychologists have had before him, is to get the Big Five score of a person, you have to interview him. And it's mostly a 270-item questionnaire. So it takes an hour to get the profile. And this is also difficult because most people are very reluctant to give that interview. But Kosinski looked at Facebook. And he suddenly realized, hey, wait a minute, people are giving away so much information. What if I link that to the Big Five score? And here are some of his findings. With only 10 likes, his program knew the person better than a colleague of that person would. Just a little explanation. A like does not mean if you like a comment. A like means you like a Facebook page. For example, I like or follow Guardian, or I like and follow a group of my former classmates. So that's what we call a Facebook like. And with only 10 likes, Kosinski's program would know me better than a colleague would. With 100 likes, his program could describe me better than my mother could. And with 230 likes, the program knew me better than my spouse did. And with 300 likes, the program could describe me more exactly than I could have myself. So here we are at the core moment of singularity theory. The machine is smarter than what it's looking at. Of course, how did he really get that data? He devised a little test back in 2009, and he put that onto Facebook. It's just a short personality test called My Personality, and he asked these questions. I don't talk a lot, that's moderately inaccurate, and then 5 more questions, and that was a hidden small big 5 test. I think maybe many of you have done that test. It is also disguised in programs like how big is my brain, what movie am I, what's my superhero name, all these small gimmicks that were on Facebook between the years of 2007 and 2010, maybe 11. So if you filled out this thing on Facebook, afterwards appeared this page. It was a request for permission. And it asked you to access not only your information, but also the information of all of your friends. And back then, maybe you cybersecurity guys knew that. I did not know it. I thought, wow, this is cool, and I pressed yes, and I allowed the machine to take all the data, not only from myself, but also from all of my friends on Facebook. A couple of hundred ones, maybe back then. So they scraped the data, and very soon, Mikael Kosinski had a vast amount of 6 million profiles of people. And he couldn't believe it. It was a dream come true for all psychologists. Suddenly you had all the data to match, and you could easily make a big file profile of all these 6 million people. A short intermission. At the same time, 3 other people appeared on the stage. From your left to your right, Robert Mercer, one of the richest men in the world. He started out in the 60s at IBM, actually working on very, very early AI programs. For example, what we use today quite frequently, Google Translate, goes back to his work. But he also was engaged in hedge funding and all these other things, and he became a very rich man. Robert Mercer has a very super conservative right-wing agenda. He wants to change the US, maybe even the world. And he's willing to put a lot of money into that. Along with him is his daughter, Rebecca Mercer. If you Google these 2 guys or people, you will always find the same pictures. They are very, very shy and very reluctant to show up. And this maybe, you of course know that. The most interesting people are those you can't Google. And Robert Mercer early on got invested in Breitbart, a right-wing website, and he met with Steve Bannon, the guy on the bottom. And he realized Steve Bannon has the demagogic energy and charm that would be necessary to spread the word. He made him the boss of Breitbart, but soon they realized we need something else. And you probably can't see it. Here you can see my PowerPoint skills. They drew up a huge company, which they called the SCL Group. And that's a company that did a lot of things, psyops. They really tried to turn around voting and elections in Kenya, in the Caribbean. They worked in the Baltic area. And they realized we have the power to change the perception of people. We can make them vote in a certain direction. And then they started to focus in on election in the Western world. And this is the setup they had. This guy is important, Alexander Kogan. Alexander Kogan was studying at Cambridge University together with Michał Kosinski, the Polish guy who invented the model to mix Big Five with Facebook profiles. And now this is still unclear, but apparently Kogan either stole or copied or had a similar idea, we never know, and he took that idea and sold it to SCL via the Global Science Research. SCL back then was funded by Robert Mercer and Steve Bannon, and they had Alexander Nix, a guy who was very famous last year, as their CEO. And they got their hand on this model in order to scrape data from Facebook. He devised an own test, Alexander Kogan. They put it on internet, and they scraped data in a huge amount of profiles, 87 million profiles from Facebook. It was also funded in a weird, complex thing through the Russian government. Also, Cambridge University was still involved, which, of course, the chair of the Psychometric Institute hated. And all behind this sat Robert Mercer thinking about the election 2016 in the US. Here, once again, we can see the process. So they started out, this is the graphic by The Guardian, they started out with so-called seeders. They paid people to take the test on Facebook and to open up for the other, for their friends. And from then on, they collected more and more data, like a snowball system, all through this personality quiz result. And in the end, they had these 87 million, which is a huge amount. They then used this model by Kosinski/Kogan, and here we have Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, explaining how he used this model in order to identify and approach voters. Important here, you can see Big Five inventory. That's the Big Five we talked about earlier. And he frequently showed, you can see here, neuroticism and openness. These are the two main areas that he was looking for, because if you are high on neuroticism, you are bound to be afraid. If you are afraid, you are very open to messages. Secondly, if you're high on openness, you are maybe open to try something else, like, let's say, try a new party. The first thing Robert Mercer did, he said, let's not go for Trump, that man is crazy, let's go for Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz back then was a very conservative, but rooted in the Republican Party, but he didn't have a big following. However, Cambridge Analytica thought maybe we can turn around things. But they didn't have enough data. So what they had was a program that was basically AI, which they had to feed with data. So they needed sort of a first testing, like a guinea pig. Ted Cruz was their guinea pig. They started their program, fed the machine, not only with Facebook data, but with data they scraped from all over the place. 400 or even, I think even more than 1,000 data brokers, like healthcare, wherever they could get their hands on, credit cards. They gathered information and fed the machine. And soon enough, they had a quite clear picture of Ted Cruz, but they realized it's not enough. Ted Cruz as a personality is not enough to swing the election. They got a new client. In the UK, Nigel Farage and Leave.eu, so the extremer part of the Brexit campaign, hired Cambridge Analytica. And here again, Cambridge Analytica being British and Alexander Nix being British, they tried the machine on the Brits. Nobody believed, if you remember back 2 years, nobody believed that the Brexit could become real. But there was a video on YouTube showing Cambridge Analytica partners who were partying 2 weeks before the Brexit election and said, we will win this thing. So they knew or believed or hoped. After the Brexit, Trump suddenly thought this looks interesting, and he turned to Cambridge Analytica and said, okay, here are $5.4 million, do me a service. Additionally, Robert Mercer paid $5.4 million in order to support the Make America Great Again campaign, which are 2 different campaigns. And what did Cambridge Analytica do? Well, they created this app. And this app, they gave to the people, to the forefront people who ran around in the States and were knocking on doors. But they didn't just knock on doors and said, would you like to vote for Trump? They looked at their app, the one you see here. It's the walking list. They could see where they should go, who's the person. They could see their personality score, and they knew what arguments and what opinions they should pull before they knock on the door. It's often been said that Hillary Clinton had something similar, and that is true. She worked with Blue Lab, a very innovative company, but they did not have psychological profiling, okay? So they did not know what personality is standing in front of me. They did only know here lives this person and he has this and that interests. What happened next? Donald Trump got elected. It was a huge outcry. Nobody would have thought it. Again, we found on YouTube a leaked video, which is deleted by now, where they were celebrating 1 week prior to the election. The Cambridge Analytica people were partying, and you could hear the voice, we swung the election. What does that mean? First, Trump was happy, but the team of Trump was very reluctant to say it was the work of Cambridge Analytica. Instead, everyone tried to claim their own piece of the cake, so everyone thought it was our job, we did it, no one else was involved. After that, Cambridge Analytica continued their own path, and our article came out at the beginning of December, where we basically wrote that the company had a huge impact, and maybe this was actually illegal, because it is illegal to scrape data from Facebook. We got some angry calls from Alexander Nix. They said they forced us to write that this is not true, they don't do it. And Cambridge Analytica continued their way. They had been working for many other countries, recently in Kenya. And it seemed like this is the new path to go when it comes to political communication. Mikael, the Polish researcher, was suddenly very famous, and he continued his work, and his next thing was deep neural networks are more accurate than humans at detecting sexual orientation from facial images. Now that's very controversial. That means if a machine looks at your face, they can tell if you are straight or gay. A human cannot do that. There was a huge outcry about this, but he continued his work, and what he actually was trying to show over and over again is that the machines you're carrying around and that you're giving away data to is much smarter than any human being. Maybe half a year after our article came out, Leave EU got under investigation over the EU referendum spending. So basically it came out that Cambridge Analytica had been paid by Nigel Farage's campaign, and this was brought in front of the justice. Then again, half a year later, this guy appeared. Chris Wiley, former IT expert with Cambridge Analytica, came out and, as a whistleblower, went to the Guardian Observer, to Carol Cadwallader, a brilliant journalist, and told basically our story, but from the inside. He said, it's all true. We actually harvested 87 million profiles, and this is so disturbing to me that I cannot live with it. I have to go on, I have to give away this information. And immediately afterwards, I think you all remember it, Cambridge Analytica got under fire, and it went bankrupt. A week after Chris Wiley was on TV, I was in a pub in London, and I wanted to watch Champions League football, but this was on. And I was shocked that in a football pub in London, they were not showing the soccer game, they were showing the hearing of Mark Zuckerberg. And I was looking at it, and I mean, you all know, he didn't say much. He usually just said, I have to go back to my people and check with them. But at the same time, this was the moment where he, for the first time, was confronted with the fact that what had happened is that Facebook was leaking. Even more than that, that he had sold out the most precious information he had, and that was the profiles of his users. Again, he confirmed officially 87 million accounts harvested. That is a lot. And it's even more than that, because this is only the harvest that Cambridge Analytica did. There are many, many more companies in this game. Now, Cambridge Analytica was destroyed, but the people behind it are not stupid. They immediately regrouped and funded a company called Emmer Data in August 2017. And you can see now here's the structure. Rebecca Ann Mercer, that's the daughter of Robert Mercer. Robert Mercer himself is no longer in the, the chart. And also the unfortunate Alexander Nix, suspended CEO, but his sidekick, Alexander Bruce Taylor, is still around. And this company is still running, and they're still just trying to regroup their business and to take it to another or maybe a next level. So this is basically the story of our research. And every time I talk about this, usually over a beer with friends, I hear the following three questions. Did Cambridge Analytica really swing the election? How effective is actually psychographic? And what should we do about it? Question number one, did Cambridge Analytica swing the election? My honest answer is, I don't know. During election, there are so many factors at play. The biggest factor being the candidate himself. Then in the United States of America, you have a couple of other very interesting factors, one being in 2016, the extreme hatred towards the Democratic establishment, also extreme hatred towards Hillary Clinton. So I would say misogyny was one of the biggest factors during the election. But of course, political communication is also a factor. And within political communication, Cambridge Analytica played a certain role. So yes, they were important for the election. But if you turn it around and ask me, would Trump have won even without the help of Cambridge Analytica? I would say, yeah, probably. So the question is not so much how important were they for the election, but rather, question number 2, how effective is psychographic? And here I would say it's super effective. Man, it's so effective, we don't even understand it. And the thing is, we are only at the beginning. Let me tell you about something that scientists now are working a lot on. It's facial recognition. You've heard about it. And we mostly think it's about recognizing, can the machine recognize our face? But that's just a small, tiny part of it. The much bigger thing is that we constantly stare at our phones like this. So we can assume that our phones know a lot about our different facial expressions. They have seen us when we're happy, they have seen us when we're sad, they have seen us when we're aroused, they have seen us when we're excited. So psychographics right now work on, they know who you are, they know what you like, they know what you're afraid of, and they know when you are afraid and when you are excited. So at the right moment, they can send the right message to the right person because they know how you feel, because they look at you through your phone. IBM is working on something similar. I don't know if you can read it. I just saw there are some IBM guys back there. They are at the moment at the forefront of psychographics. Always interesting to talk to them. They are mixing the Big Five score here with a couple of other models, and this will turn out to be the next big thing. Another one is Caliber Mind. Here's a quote from their CEO, which I find is very interesting. They can, based on what you write, determine who you are. This is important because most people use, at the moment, social media. They write things, so we comment things. And just by reading a comment with 100 words, that is not a lot, they can tell you where you stand on the emotional versus analytical side, or they can match it with the Big Fives, and they know pretty well who you are. And because we usually don't comment anonymously, but with our names or our tag, they know who you are. If we talk about the effectiveness of psychographics, we have to, however, take into account one counter-argument, and that is the so-called paradox of plenty. I'm sure you heard the term, and in this context, it means if you have a lot of data, you can prove anything with it. So you could take the data of a person, and if you look at it from a certain angle, it will turn out that he might be prone to become a democratic. But it could also say this person is prone to never become a Democrat. So that means we should not overestimate the power of big data, because if you have too much information, or the other way around, if you have very little information, you are confused. The more information you get, the clearer is your picture of a person. But at one point, there's a tipping point. There's a tipping point of information intake. We can actually know too much. And if you pass that tipping point and you know too much about the person, you feel as confused as before. So I will just say we should be aware about believing that if we have enough data of anything, we know everything. Which leads us to the last question: what should we do? And here's one answer. It's obviously a joke, right? But actually, if you would do that, then you would be safe. So basically, this guy says, give up digital things. It's a hard message for you, because this is where you work. But he said, the minute you have the phone, you are under surveillance. And not only because someone is looking for you, but because you are constantly giving away things. And what we have done is we have made a deal with the devil. Because you cannot do that, what this guy suggests. Especially you cannot do that. And now no other person can say it if he's being hired. You cannot go up and say, I don't use Google. You need to be on LinkedIn in order to be hired. Most people, the only way they stay in touch with their family is through Facebook. If you're not in a WhatsApp group, you're not going to know what's happening around with your friends. So we've made a pact a deal with the devil. We give away information constantly. We know the danger, but at the same time, we can't live without it. So what's the conclusion of all of this? If I now look back 2.5 years ago, I had never heard about a company called Cambridge Analytica. Now we've seen where this company have taken us, and it's just a small glimpse into a world that is constantly developing and going further and further. And the people behind this who are pushing this agenda, it's not an agenda of curiosity or of scientific interest. It's an agenda of political motivation. And you should be aware of that, I think. And I like to end with this quote. It's by a sociologist from the 70s, funnily enough, Gunther Anders. He said, "My 3 main theses, that we are no match for the perfection of our products, that we produce more than we can take responsibility for, and that we believe that what we can do, we are also allowed to do." Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much for that great presentation. Wow.
Thanks.
So many things raised in this presentation. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about over the last 2 days are found in and embedded in a lot of the things you bring forward. Any questions, comments from the audience? Yes? Could you? We'll give you a microphone. Thank you. And tell us who you are to everybody, and then your question, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Mikael, thank you for the nice speech. Very interesting. My name is Christian, and I wonder if you have any views about, because you're in the media and probably follow this case very closely. So any views on whether this case is, how do you see the regulation of tech giants by governments, and is it actually going to happen, and where do you see that headed?
Yeah, that's the big question, actually. It's very hard to answer. We can see at Facebook, I think all of you have already seen it. Now in the EU, you constantly have to allow people to use your data. But because it's so often, you just click yes, allow. Because if you go to this thing that says, this is what we're doing, you read through it and say yes, no, yes, no. So the default is still, we agree that all our data is being scraped. But they are now informing us that they are scraping our data. So there is some sort of regulation. And I think what's important is that this should be the other way around. The regulation default setting should be, don't scrape our data. But it comes with a price. The price would be, for example, WhatsApp will cost money. So we are all used to using everything for free. And the price we're paying is our data. But it is our data, and it's very, very valuable. So I think maybe we should turn it around and ask for it. If we have this Limnell becoming the cybersecurity minister,
I'd love that, but he's not very eager.
he should claim for that, because I think it would be important to go back to say we pay for services, but leave our data alone, and that so far is not happening.
That's a business opportunity for new social networks, or what we're going to call them in the future, intelligent social networks, creating this kind of service that I think more and more people maybe want to migrate to.
Right.
Yeah, I see that. But I found it very interesting when you after all that you've done, all that you've studied, all that you've written, when you said, in my opinion, Cambridge did not really swing the election. And you added to that the paradox of plenty, saying, even with all the data, we can't be sure that this person, when they went on with their walking list, will this person be probably voting for the Democratic Party or never voting for the Democrat? We don't really know. So in a way, though this has been brought out as a fault in process, you're still of the opinion that it was not a swing of it did not really take them down. The Democratic Party, I mean.
I think there are just many factors at play.
Yeah.
And I think after the election, people were eager to have this one explanation.
Yes.
Oh, it was that.
No, but
it's not like that in reality. And I think one word about manipulation, I think I'm very careful to say people were manipulated. I rather talk about targeting. So if you can target people very, very strongly, but you cannot manipulate.
You become more efficient in your propaganda.
I believe in the free will. People vote with a free mind and a free mindset, mostly in the Western world. But you can target them. So the question is, what's your point where you would vote for Republican, even if you're not a Republican? And that point, if I know you and I know that point and I give you the right message, then something happens. But it's not a manipulation. So if people say Cambridge Analytica manipulated the US to vote for Trump, I will be very careful.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. That's very honest and very correct. More questions? Comments?
So over there.
Oh, back there. Thank you. We have two. Oh, thank you. Yes, it's so dark in here. I can't see the back row. Tell us who you are, please, and then your question, comment.
Hi, it's Bogdan here from Synopsis. Considering the things you mentioned at the moment about the effectiveness of Cambridge Analytica, there's an interesting case that was some intern kind of leaked some old code of Cambridge Analytica they used for doing Twitter mining on profiles. And it looked kind of very simple. In that sense, what they did, they looked for words like Hillary, they looked for Trump, they looked for refugees, and kind of did some classification on that. But based on that, of course, we don't know exactly what they used after that, what code and more sophisticated methods. But based on that, it looked very crude, very simple. And did you consider that basically, because you say it's not proven that they really did influence the election, did you consider that they were just lucky, basically? They were a phony company that kind of were at the right time selling the right product, and they actually didn't do much other than advertising the services. And in the end, they were just guessing around, well, these people are, you should go there and influence those. I mean, could that be also one explanation?
Interesting.
I would not call Cambridge Analytica a phony company. I would be careful about that. I think these are people who worked very strongly, very strategically. And let me just give you another example. It might be true that a stick word like refugee is just a lucky punch. And maybe that's all that needed, right? Maybe refugee was such an important stick word. But they did other things. For example, maybe you remember that Trump focused on Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And many people said, man, what are you doing? This is nuts. Don't go there. But he just followed the advice of Cambridge Analytica, who had found out through their profiles that there will be people who are, based on their psychological profile, maybe open to swing, to change, to swing votes, yeah. So it's both messages. Sometimes it's very simple and maybe just a lucky punch. Sometimes it's very clear and very strategic. And the mixture of that turned out to be successful. Again, as I said before, how important was that? We don't know. But it was one puzzle in a huge puzzle.
And you also mentioned that Hillary Clinton also had similar tools to profile people.
Yeah, she was Blue Lab, yeah.
So where's the boundary of legal use of profiling, and where is it against the law and reprehensible? Good question, thank you. I think you had a colleague next to you that also wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, hi, Nate. My name's Rob. Just wanted to ask about the way that you frame this. You say you make a pact with the devil.
Did I say that?
You did, yes. is it not that we've become a little obsessed about the negative aspects of profiling? So, I go to weddings where friends have met through Match.com and so happy, have children, friends that have got great jobs through LinkedIn, all the amazing reunions with friends only made possible through Facebook, etc., etc. So that profiling...
Happy profiling.
Yes. We never seem to talk about that, though. I mean, just getting your opinion on that.
No, that's a great comment. I appreciate it very much. I think you're right. I mean, if I say we make a pact with the devil, I think it's being used in a political way. And we should be very careful about that. And SCL, the mother company of Cambridge Analytica, they are into psyops. They are into hardcore political, swinging hardcore political decisions. So what you're talking about is the other side. Maybe I also like if advertising would be a little better. If I only would see advertising that really matters to me, great, more power to them. I would love that.
And you're willing to give that information.
Exactly. Or as you described, meeting great people. I think the success of different partnering services is based on profiling. You're right, it's good. But it's being misused on the political scale, which I find very, very unsettling. So that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. That's the pact with the devil. Yeah.
And I think that we also need to recognize all the other factors. In this building last year, one of your colleagues from your industry, Richard Quest, was hosting our biggest business event here called the Nordic Business Forum. And he was speaking to a scientist on trust, Rachel Botsman. And Rachel explained that there's a trust deficit within our media and in our political elite that was also a cause for this. Oh. And of course, he's a CNN person, and she says, the New York Times has invested in its integrity after the downfall of the financial crisis. People felt that the media were on the side of the banks and the elite, and started distrusting them. But then the New York Times, the Guardian, has now reached out because of fake news. Now they're starting to actually, grow as businesses. And then Richard said, "Yeah, like CNN." And then Rachel, great scientist, said, "I wouldn't put CNN in the same category as the New York Times." Meaning that there's also a trust deficit within the media. That has to be earned, and I think you've earned the trust of many in presenting things the way you did today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Give him a big hand. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.